I never thought that a letter from a prison could be the evidence that exposed my husband's horrific crime. For 12 years, I lived in a perfectly happy marriage, where Daniel, a successful engineer, was the perfect husband, the loving father. I believed I was the luckiest woman on earth. But then, on a March afternoon in 2007, when I casually opened his office desk drawer, I found it. A simple white envelope, stamped from the Walla Walla State Penitentiary, Washington. It wasn't just any letter. It was sent by a man named Guile, and it began with the line, "Daniel, my friend, I'm standing firm on our promise. I haven't told anyone about that night, and I never will." Every line I read was like a knife to the gut, peeling back a rotten secret that spanned 15 years, a secret of blood, cowardice, and the terrible sacrifice of an innocent man. My entire life suddenly became a stage play, built upon the ruins of a fatal accident. The accident that took the life of my own little sister. I married my sister's killer. I slept next to him, bore his children, and cried on his shoulder every anniversary of her death. The weight of this revelation didn't just break my trust, it shattered my reality. It forced me into a conscious, daily hell, a private asylum where the only inmate was me. For 2 long years, I wasn't just waiting for Gail to show up and demand justice. I was waiting for the moment Daniel's mask would finally crack, and my own soul could stop pretending to be whole. And this is the story of the day everything finally collapsed. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they shake your very beliefs. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. I've always been a big reader, ever since I was a young woman. And that day I was buying a book of poetry when I accidentally bumped into him. I knocked his book onto the ground. He bent down to pick it up. I bent down too, and we bumped our heads. We started laughing. That's how it all began. Daniel was a civil engineer, a hard-working, serious man, respected all over town. He had his own firm. He did projects for construction, renovations, that kind of thing. He earned a good living. We lived in a nice, comfortable house in a quiet suburb. Our 2 children went to private school. We weren't rich, but we lived well, thank God. He was always a very reserved man, one of those who don't talk much, who keep things to themselves. But I thought that was just his way. Some men are like that, more closed off. And he was affectionate with me. He was a good father to the boys. He never raised his voice at me, never disrespected me. That's why when I discovered everything, it hurt so much, because I trusted him completely. That Thursday in March, I remember it was a hot day, one of those muggy, late summer days that make you feel a little restless. The boys had gone to school. Daniel had left early for a construction site he was overseeing on the other side of town. And I stayed home doing the usual things, cleaning, lunch, those housewife things. Around 3 inches the afternoon, I remembered I needed to find my oldest son's birth certificate. He was going to enroll in a course and needed the original document. I knew that Daniel kept all our important documents in his office desk drawer in the little corner of the house he used to work when he was home. I went into the office. It was a small room with a large wooden desk, a bookshelf full of technical engineering books, some project blueprints scattered around, everything very organized, because Daniel was always very methodical about his things. I opened the main desk drawer, and that's where my life changed forever. The certificate was there along with other documents, but when I reached for it, I saw that there was an envelope half hidden under some papers. I picked up the envelope. It was open. The letter had already been read. I looked around nervously, as if someone might catch me doing this. But I was alone in the house. Just me and that heavy silence that had suddenly taken over everything. I took the letter out of the envelope. It was a sheet of ruled paper, the kind from a cheap notebook. I stood there, in the middle of my empty house, and felt a heavy silence fall. It was the silence before the storm, the silence of a wife who had just discovered that, perhaps, her entire life was a cruel joke. The handwriting was a little shaky, like someone who hadn't had much schooling, and it began like this. "Daniel, my brother, I hope this letter finds you well, along with your family." My brother, that word confused me right away, because Daniel didn't have a brother. He was an only child. That word, brother, haunted me. Who was this prisoner? Was it an old debt? I thought I knew Daniel, but perhaps, for all my life, I had been sleeping next to a complete stranger. His mother, Mrs. Evelyn, had always made that very clear. She had only had him. So, who was this person calling my husband brother? I continued reading, and with every line I read, my stomach churned more. You were there too. You were also a part of it. But I took all the blame alone because we agreed it was better that way. Your mom promised she would take care of me when I got out. She promised you would give me a chance to start over. I hope that promise is true, Daniel, because I've already given up 15 years of my life for you. 15 years rotting here. And when I finally get out, I won't have anything left. No family, no future, nothing. I'll only have you and the promise we made. Don't let me down. My brother, Gael. I read that letter 3 times, 4 times, trying to understand, trying to make sense of all those words that seemed like an incomplete jigsaw puzzle. What was that promise? What night was he referring to? What secret needed to be protected? My hands started to tremble. I put the letter back in the envelope and stood there, looking at it, unable to think straight. My head was a total mess. Had Daniel done something wrong in the past? Had he gotten involved in something illegal, and this Gael guy had taken the blame? But why? Why would someone go to jail in place of another person? I looked at the clock. It was almost 4 o'clock. Daniel would get home around 7, more or less. I had 3 hours to decide what to do. Confront him as soon as he arrived, ask him about the letter. But what if he denied it? What if he got angry at me for going through his things? I've always been a woman who speaks her mind, who is direct. But something about that letter scared me. There was something very wrong there, something heavy, and I needed to understand what it was before I said anything. I put the letter away exactly as it was. I closed the drawer. I left the office and went to the kitchen to finish making dinner. But my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the pot. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to act normal, but inside I was a wreck. When Daniel arrived home that night, he was the same as always, tired from work, but relaxed. We had dinner as a family. The boys talked about their day at school. Everything was very normal. But I looked at my husband and couldn't stop thinking, who are you, really? What are you hiding from me? That night, lying in bed next to him, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, wondering what kind of secret was so serious that it needed to be kept locked away. And that phrase wouldn't leave my head. Ever since that night, I knew what had to be done. What night? What had happened? In the following days, I started paying attention to everything. Every move Daniel made when he checked the mail in the mailbox, when he was in his office with the door closed, when he answered the phone and spoke softly. I was looking for signs. Anything that would give me a clue about what was going on. And it was 2 weeks later that I had an idea that would change everything. I was going to start intercepting those letters before him. I was going to read them first, because if this Gael guy sent a letter once, he would definitely send another one. And the more letters I read, the more clues I would have to put this puzzle together. That's when my personal hell began. Every day, as soon as the mail carrier passed, I ran to the mailbox before Daniel got there. I was looking for an envelope from the prison, and when there wasn't one, I felt relieved and tense at the same time. Relieved because I didn't have to deal with another revelation. Tense because I knew one would arrive sooner or later. And it did. A month after the first letter, there was another envelope there. From the same prison, from the same sender, Gael Harrison. That was the full name that came on the back. I picked up that envelope with trembling hands again. I went inside the house, locked the bathroom door, and opened it. This second letter was even more disturbing than the first. Daniel, I'm writing again because I need to tell you something. Yesterday I had a terrible nightmare. I dreamed about that night again, about everything that happened, about the girl lying in the street, about the blood, about you crying, desperate, asking me for help. And I helped you, my brother. I always helped you. But some days the weight of all this is hard to carry. Some days I wake up here in my cell and wonder if it was worth it, if you really deserved for me to do what I did, because you moved on with your life and I'm stuck here paying for a mistake that wasn't just mine. The reference to a girl, blood, and a shared mistake makes this far more sinister than a simple debt. Gael is paying the price, but we know Daniel is the coward living free. Sophia's fear is palpable. We need to keep reading to understand the victim's identity. You were there too. You were also a part of it. But I took all the blame alone because we agreed it was better that way. Your mom promised she would take care of me when I got out. She promised you would give me a chance to start over. I hope that promise is true, Daniel, because I gave up 15 years of my life for you. 15 years. And when I get out of here, I won't have anything left. No family, no future, nothing. I'll only have you and the promise we made. Don't let me down, my brother. Gael. I read that letter, and my whole body went cold. A girl lying in the street. Blood. 15 years in prison. My God, what had happened? Had my husband run someone over? Had he killed someone? And this Gael had taken the blame in his place? I sat there on the cold bathroom floor and started to cry. Crying out of desperation, fear, confusion. Who was the man I had married? Who was the father of my children? I didn't know him. I didn't know anything. And the worst part was that I couldn't talk to anyone. I couldn't vent, because if I told anyone, I would have to explain how I found out. I would have to admit that I was reading the letters in secret. And more than that, I was afraid of what might happen if the truth came out. Could my husband be arrested? Would our family be destroyed? I put the second letter away with the first one, in a secret place only I knew about, inside an old cookie tin that was on top of the kitchen cabinet, where I kept thread and buttons. No one ever touched that spot. It would be my hiding place. And that's how the most terrible months of my life began. Months of lying, of pretending, of carrying an immense weight on my back without being able to share it with anyone. I woke up every day, made coffee for my husband, kissed him at the door when he left for work, took care of the boys, cooked, cleaned the house, everything normal. But inside, I was slowly dying, because every time I looked at Daniel, I saw a stranger, a man I didn't truly know, a man who kept a terrible secret, a secret of blood, of death, of cowardice. Because that's what it was, right? Pure cowardice. Letting another man pay for his mistake, letting another man rot in jail while he lived his peaceful, respected, happy life. The letters kept coming, about one a month. Sometimes they took longer. Sometimes two came in the same month, and I read them all. I hid them all, and with every letter, a new piece of the puzzle was revealed. But also a new piece of me died inside. I wanted to confront him. God knows I wanted to. I wanted to throw those letters in his face and yell, "Who did you kill? Who was that girl? What did you do?" But I was afraid. Afraid of the answer, because as long as I didn't know the complete truth, there was still a thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as bad as I imagined. But deep down, I already knew. I already knew it was worse, much worse. 6 months passed since I read the first letter. 6 months of living a lie. 6 months of pretending that everything was fine while inside I was falling apart. And during that time, I collected 8 letters. 8 letters that I kept in that cookie tin, as if they were evidence of a crime. Because they were, weren't they? They were proof that my husband had destroyed one person's life and let another man pay the price. But I still didn't know the details. I still didn't know who the victim was. I still didn't know exactly what had happened that night that Gail kept mentioning. And that was killing me inside, because our imagination is worse than reality, you know? I kept creating scenarios in my head, each one more terrible than the last. It was September 2007 that I decided I needed to dig deeper. I couldn't just keep waiting for the letters to arrive. I needed to investigate. I needed to discover the truth for myself, because otherwise, I was going to go completely crazy. I started with the internet. At that time, the internet wasn't as comprehensive as it is today, but there was already a lot of information. I sat down at the living room computer on a day when Daniel had traveled to New York for a big project he was working on there. The boys were at school. I had the house to myself and a few free hours. I typed the full name that came on the letters, Gail Harrison. I pressed the search key and waited, my heart pounding. A few results popped up, old, digitized newspaper articles. I clicked on the first one. Young man sentenced to 15 years for manslaughter in fatal accident. The article was from 1992. 15 years before that date, I started reading, and every word was like a punch to the gut. Gail Harrison, 22, was sentenced yesterday to 15 years in prison for the vehicular manslaughter of Jennifer Coleman, 19, which occurred on the morning of the 14th of August 1992. According to the court records, Harrison was driving while intoxicated when he lost control of the vehicle on Oak Avenue and struck the victim who was walking on the sidewalk. Jennifer died at the scene. Harrison initially fled, but turned himself in to police 3 days later, accompanied by a lawyer. During the trial, he expressed profound remorse and took full responsibility for the incident. I stopped reading. My vision blurred. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the sound of it in my ears. Jennifer Coleman. Jennifer. That name I knew so well, that had marked my life forever. This, right here, is the point of no return. The secret isn't just dark, it's personal. The man she married killed her own sister. This realization isn't just grief. It's a cosmic betrayal that broke Sophia's soul. Wait until you hear how he managed to look her in the eye all those years. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be my Jennifer, my little sister, my youngest sister, who had died in a car accident when she was 19 years old. In August 1992, on August 14, my hands started to shake so much I could barely hold the mouse. I clicked on another article, and another, and another. They all spoke of the same accident, the same name, Jennifer Coleman, my sister. I stood up from the chair so fast that it fell over. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. I threw up everything in my stomach. Then I stayed there, hugging the toilet, crying so hard I couldn't even breathe properly because everything had just made sense. Yes, I was throwing up. Because my body knew, before my mind could accept, that the most disgusting evil and betrayal had crept into my very bones. This wasn't just my sister's death, it was the death of my reality. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. That whole damn jigsaw puzzle had just fit together right in front of me. Gail hadn't killed my sister. It had been Daniel, my husband, the man I loved, the father of my children. He had killed Jennifer, and Gail had taken the blame. That's why the letters, that's why the secret, that's why everything. And the worst part of it all, the part that utterly destroyed me, is that Daniel knew. A new kind of agony settled in my chest, a physical ache that never left. It wasn't just the fact of Jennifer's death. It was the realization that my entire marriage was a carefully constructed shrine to his guilt. Every loving glance, every kind word, every anniversary hug was a performance, a penance. I was not a wife. I was his unwitting act of atonement. I would lie in bed, rigid, listening to his quiet, steady breathing, and the silence would scream at me. He knows, and he chose the lie. He chose the lie over you, over your grief, over her memory. That was the night my innocence died. Not in one violent moment, but in 12 years of slow, psychological poisoning. He knew who I was when he met me. He knew Jennifer was my sister. He had to know, because my maiden name was Coleman, the same as Jennifer's. And this is the worst part. He knew. He decided that his budding love was more important than the truth and my grief. That cowardice, it was worse than the original crime. It turned him into a sick liar. And when we started dating, when he proposed, when we got married, he never, ever said anything. How did he manage it? How did he manage to look into my eyes all these years? How did he manage to hug me when I cried for my sister every August 14? How did he manage to console me, to tell me everything would be okay, that she was in a better place, when he knew the truth, when he was the one responsible? I stayed in that bathroom for I don't know how long. When I managed to stand up, I washed my face, brushed my teeth, and tried to compose myself. But it was impossible. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. I looked like another person. A broken, destroyed person. I went back to the computer. I needed to know more. I needed to understand everything. I read all the articles I could find about the accident. There were about 6 or 7 of them, all basically saying the same thing. That Gail was drunk, that he lost control of the car, that he hit Jennifer, that she died instantly, that he fled and then turned himself in. But in none, absolutely none of the articles did Daniel's name appear. He didn't exist in that story. It was as if he had never been there, as if he were a ghost. But he was. The letters proved it. You were there too. You were also a part of it. Gail's words echoed in my head. I needed to know more. I printed all the articles. I put them away with the letters in the cookie tin and decided I would look somewhere else. A place I had avoided for years. The attic. When we bought that house 10 years ago, Daniel had insisted on storing some of his old things in the attic. Sealed cardboard boxes that he said were from when he was younger. Old documents. Things he didn't use anymore but wanted to keep. I had never gone through them. I respected his space. But now I didn't respect anything anymore. I needed the truth, whatever the cost. I waited until the next day. Daniel left for work early, as always. The boys went to school, and I, with a flashlight in my hand and my heart in my throat, climbed the ladder that led to the attic. It was a cramped, dusty, poorly lit place. There were about 4 or 5 cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. I started with the first one. It was old clothes, shirts, pants, things from when he was younger, nothing important. The second box had his college books, manuals, term papers, also nothing special. But when I opened the third box, I knew I had found what I was looking for. Deep inside, under some old notebooks and some old photos, there was a blue plastic folder. I opened the folder, and inside were old newspaper clippings, all carefully cut out and saved. All about the accident, about Jennifer, about Gail being sentenced. My husband had kept the clippings. He had kept them for 15 years as a memory, as remorse. I don't know. All I know is that there was the physical proof that he had never forgotten, that this had stayed with him all this time. But there was more. At the bottom of the folder was a photo, an old, slightly yellowed photo. It was of 4 young men. They must have been in their early 20s. They were hugging, smiling. They looked like they were at a party. I recognized Daniel right away. He was one of the younger guys, with more hair. But it was him. And next to him, with his arm around his shoulder, was another guy. I turned the photo over. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Daniel's, it was written, "Me, Gail, Matthew, and Jason. Engineering graduation, December 1991. They were friends. College friends." The story started to complete itself in my head. They were together that night. Both of them. Maybe even all 4 who were in the photo. But something happened, and Gail took the blame alone. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, with that photo in my hand, and tried to imagine what it had been like. I tried to imagine that night in August 1992. 2 young men, recently graduated, probably celebrating something, drinking, having fun, and suddenly the accident. My little sister walking on the sidewalk, coming home from a friend's party. The car out of control. The impact, her body lying on the ground. The blood. And Daniel, desperate, too young to handle it, afraid, with his whole life ahead of him, the scholarship he had just gotten, the promise of a brilliant future as an engineer, all threatened by one mistake, by one moment of carelessness. And Gail, the loyal friend, the friend who didn't have as much to lose, who had already gotten into trouble before, who had some minor youthful offenses, who looked at his friend and said, "I'll take the fall. I'll say I was driving. You have a future. I have nothing. I'll take it." And Daniel's family, rich enough to hire good lawyers for Gail, to make a deal, to promise to take care of him when he got out. 15 years. 15 years of one man's life in exchange for another's future. I stayed there in the attic until it got dark. When I came down, I was decided. I needed to confront someone, but not Daniel. Not yet. I wasn't ready to look him in the face and hear the truth from his mouth. I needed more confirmation. I needed to be absolutely certain before I destroyed everything. And I knew exactly who to talk to. Mrs. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, Daniel's mother. She knew. I was sure she knew. The letters mentioned that she had promised to take care of Gail, that she had been part of the deal. She had the answers I needed. It was on a Saturday afternoon that I showed up at her house without warning. Daniel had taken the boys to play baseball at the club. I said I had a headache and was going to stay home and rest. But as soon as they left, I got in the car and drove straight to Mrs. Evelyn's house. She lived alone in a big house in a nice neighborhood in town. She had been a widow for about 5 years. An elegant woman, always very well put together, the kind who cares a lot about appearances. When she opened the door and saw me, she was surprised. "Sophia, what a surprise. Did something happen?" I walked into the house without waiting for an invitation, without any ceremony. She immediately realized something was wrong. She followed me to the living room, worried. "Sit down," I said. My voice came out harsher than I intended. We need to talk. She sat down slowly in the armchair, looking at me with those eyes that suddenly seemed scared. I stood in front of her, my arms crossed. Who is Gail Harrison? I saw the color drain from her face. I saw her swallow hard. I saw her hands grip the arms of the armchair. Where did you get that name? Answer my question. Who is he? She looked away, looked out the window, at the floor, anywhere but at me, and her silence was the confirmation I needed. She knew. Of course, she knew. I know about the letters, I said, and my voice trembled. I know he's in prison. I know he took the blame for something Daniel did, and I know it has to do with an accident, with a girl who died. Mrs. Evelyn closed her eyes. 2 tears rolled down her face. And when she opened her eyes again, I saw not just sadness, but guilt. A lot of guilt. You shouldn't have found out about this, she whispered. And when Daniel met me, when he found out I was Jennifer's sister, what did he think? Mrs. Evelyn covered her face with her hands. Asterisk. He didn't know at first. When you started dating, he didn't know you were her sister. You have a married name. You live in a different town. He never made the connection. But when you told him about your sister who had died in an accident, when you said her name and the date, he was in shock. He came here to my house desperate, saying he was going to break up with you, that he couldn't continue, but he was already in love. Asterisk. And I, God forgive me. I told him that if he truly loved you, it was better to never tell you, that you would never find out, that his life couldn't stop because of a past mistake. Asterisk. So, the whole family was an accomplice. Daniel's love was wrapped in a selfish layer of deceit sanctioned by his own mother. Sophia now has all the facts, and her next move will define her future. Stay with us to hear the final, explosive confrontation. I stood up from the sofa. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't look that woman in the face anymore. The woman who had been an accomplice to such a rotten lie for so long. You destroyed everything, I said. You destroyed Gael's life. You destroyed my family, and you destroyed any chance of true happiness Daniel and I could have had, because everything was a lie. Everything. I left that house and didn't look back. I got in the car and drove aimlessly for hours. I stopped in a secluded spot and screamed. I screamed until I was hoarse. I cried until I had no more tears. And when I finally managed to calm down a little, I realized there was only one path now. I was going to have to confront Daniel. I was going to have to look him in the eyes and hear this whole filthy story from his mouth. But before that, I needed one more thing. I needed to know when Gail was getting out of prison, because something told me that when he showed up, when he demanded the promise, that would be the moment when everything would explode for good. And I was right. More right than I could have imagined. After I left Mrs. Evelyn's house that day, I returned to my home a different woman. I was no longer the naive Sophia who believed in fairy tales. I was no longer the loving wife who blindly trusted her husband. I was someone else, a person who knew the truth, a person who carried a weight so heavy that some nights I woke up unable to breathe properly. But I didn't confront Daniel, not at that moment, because something inside me, something I can't even explain, told me I needed to wait. I needed to wait until the day Gail got out of prison, until the day he showed up to demand the promise, because it was at that moment, that exact moment, that I would throw everything in my husband's face when he had nowhere left to run, when the truth was right there alive in front of us. And that's how the most painful period of my life began. 2 years living a conscious lie. 2 years pretending I didn't know anything. 2 years sleeping next to the man who had killed my sister, kissing him in the morning when he left for work, cooking for him, taking care of our family as if everything were normal. But nothing was normal. I was dying inside a little more each day. The letters kept coming. I kept intercepting them all, keeping them all in that cookie tin that was already almost full. And with every letter I read, a new piece of this sordid story revealed itself. Gael wrote about his life in prison, about how hard it was, about how he had been beaten by other inmates, about how he had gotten sick and almost died of pneumonia, about how he missed his mother, who had died while he was in prison, and he hadn't even been able to attend the funeral. He wrote about the nightmares, about how he dreamed every night about that scene, about my sister lying in the street, about the blood, about the despair. And he asked Daniel if it haunted him too, if he also woke up in the middle of the night sweating, seeing that girl's face every time he closed his eyes. One of the letters marked me especially. It was one that arrived in March 2008, a year after I had discovered everything. In that letter, Gael wrote something that broke my heart. He said he had passed a broken mirror in the prison corridor and had been startled by his own reflection, that he didn't recognize himself anymore, that he had entered the prison at 22, young, full of life, and now he was 37, looking like an old man, that he had lost the best years of his life in there, that he would never have a family, never have children, never know love, all because he had been loyal to a friend, and he questioned. He questioned whether it had been worth it, whether Daniel really deserved that sacrifice, whether their friendship was really worth 15 years of freedom. And he ended the letter by saying that when he got out, when he was finally free, he wanted to look Daniel in the eyes and ask, "Do you remember me? Do you remember what I did for you? Because I never forgot. Not for a single day." When I finished reading that letter, I cried. I cried for Gael, for that man I didn't even know, but who had paid such a high price for a misguided loyalty. But my tears weren't just for him. I saw myself reflected in his loss. We were both sacrifices on the altar of Daniel's cowardice. He had been manipulated into losing 15 years of freedom. I had been manipulated into losing 12 years of truth. In that moment, Gael wasn't just a stranger. He was a co-survivor. And I promised myself, right then and there, that when everything came out, I would do everything possible to help him, because his healing was intrinsically linked to mine. My tears fell for Gael, for the man I'd never met, who lost 15 years of his youth for a misguided promise. But that empathy, it gave me strength. When you realize you're not alone in your pain, you can turn it into purpose. This is when I stopped being a victim and started becoming a fighter. Remember that. Life at home became increasingly difficult. I looked at Daniel and felt a mixture of anger, disgust, and sadness. Anger for what he had done, disgust for the lie, sadness for what we could have been and never would be, because everything had been built on a rotten foundation. Everything was fake. There were nights when he tried to hug me in bed, and I made up an excuse. I said I had a headache, that I was tired, that I wasn't feeling well. And it was true. I wasn't feeling well. I was feeling destroyed, but he didn't know why. To him, I was just going through a difficult phase. He asked if it was something he had done, if I was upset with him, and I denied it. I said it was just tiredness, stress, those kinds of things women go through. My children also noticed that something was wrong. My oldest, who was 15 at the time, once asked me if his dad and I were fighting. I forced a smile and said no, that everything was fine, that he shouldn't worry. But I saw in his eyes that he didn't believe me. Children sense those things, you know? Children notice when their mother isn't okay. There were moments when I almost gave up, almost threw everything away and told the truth, because carrying it alone was killing me. I lost 10 pounds during that time. I stopped sleeping properly. I constantly had deep dark circles, pale skin. People asked if I was sick, and I was sick in my soul. But I held on. I held on because I knew it wouldn't be much longer. Gael's letters became more frequent as his parole date approached. He wrote about his plans for when he got out, about how he wanted to work, rebuild his life, maybe even study something. And he always mentioned the promise that Daniel and his family had made, that they would help him start over. In one of the last letters in January 2009, Gael wrote that he had been granted parole, that he would be released on March 15, and that as soon as he got out, he would look for Daniel. He would show up at his house to talk, to figure out how things would work from then on. When I read that letter, my heart raced. March 15. Less than 2 months away. 2 months, and everything would explode. 2 months, and I would finally be able to put an end to that whole lie. I started mentally preparing myself for what was to come. I rehearsed 1,000 times in my head how it would be. Gael ringing the doorbell, me opening the door, Daniel seeing him there, the confrontation, the truth coming out, the boys discovering everything, our family falling apart. There were nights when I stayed awake, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if it wouldn't be better to just let it go, swallow it all, and keep living the lie. After all, Jennifer had already been dead for 17 years. Nothing I did would bring her back, and my children, my boys, would suffer so much from all this. They would lose the image they had of their father. They would see the family crumble. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my little sister's face, her smile, her laugh, the plans she had. She was going to start college for education that year. She was going to fulfill her dream of being a teacher. She wanted to work with young children, teach in preschool. She used to say there was nothing more beautiful than the smile of a child learning to read. And all of that had been taken away from her because of two drunk guys who thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. Because of one who was too cowardly to admit his mistake, and because of another who was too idiotic to take the blame for something he didn't do. No, I wasn't going to let it go. I owed it to Jennifer. I owed it to her memory. And I owed it to myself too, because I deserved the truth. I deserved to live without lies. The days passed. February came and went in a blur. I was on autopilot. I woke up, did the chores, pretended everything was fine, slept, and started all over again the next day. Daniel tried to talk to me a few times, asked if I wanted to go to a doctor, get some tests, see if everything was okay with my health. I refused. I said it was just a phase that would pass. And then March arrived. March 2009, the month that would change everything. On March 10, Gail's last letter arrived. I took it from the mailbox with trembling hands. I opened it right there in the street, without even waiting to go inside. He said that in 5 days he would be free, that he could hardly believe it, that after 15 years he would finally step outside that prison, and that the first thing he would do was go to Daniel's house. He even gave the exact address, saying a social worker had helped him locate where we lived. And he set the date. March 20, a Friday. At 3 inches the afternoon, he would show up. I put that letter away with all the others. 32 letters in total, 32 proofs of a lie that had lasted 17 years. And I marked the calendar. March 20, Friday, 3 inches the afternoon, the day my life would be turned upside down for good. The week leading up to that day, I could barely function. I burned the dinner twice. I forgot to pick up my youngest son from school, and he had to call me to come get him. I dropped a tray full of dishes and everything broke. Daniel was worried. He asked if I didn't want to take a few days off, travel, relax a little. I said no, that everything was under control, but it wasn't. Nothing was under control. And then the 20th of March, 2009, arrived, a Friday with a blue sky, bright sun, one of those beautiful days that seem to mock you when you're dying of anguish inside. In the morning, everything went on as normal. Daniel left for work, the boys went to school. I stayed home trying to do the usual things, but all I could think was, in a few hours he'll be here. In a few hours, everything will end. At noon, I ate lunch alone. I could barely eat anything. My stomach was churning. At 1 o'clock, I took a shower, got dressed as if I were preparing for an important event. In a way, it was the most important event of my life in recent years. At 2 o'clock, I sat in the living room and waited. I took the cookie tin with all the letters and left it on the coffee table. I would need them. I would use them all as evidence. Daniel usually got home around 6 inches the evening, so he wouldn't be here when Gail showed up. But that was fine. I would receive Gail alone. I would talk to him and hear his version. And then, when Daniel arrived, I would confront both of them together. 2:30. My heart was already pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. I stood up, sat down, stood up again, went to the kitchen to get water, came back to the living room, looked at the clock. 2:45, 2:55. I looked out the window. The street was empty, quiet, normal, as if it were any other day, as if my life wasn't about to fall apart. And then, exactly at 3 o'clock, I saw a man getting off a city bus on the corner. A thin man, very thin, in simple clothes, a small backpack on his back. He looked at the paper in his hand, checking something. Then he looked at the house numbers and started walking in the direction of my house. I stood still, watching through the window, seeing him approach. He walked slowly, as if every step cost immense effort. When he got close, I could see his face better. He was a man of about 37, 38 years old, but he looked much older. His hair was already starting to turn gray. His skin was lined. His eyes were deep set, with that look of someone who has seen too much. He stopped in front of my gate, checked the number, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. I didn't move. I stood there frozen, staring at the door. The doorbell rang again and again, until finally my legs obeyed and I walked to the door. I opened it slowly, and there he was. Gale Harrison, the man who had spent 17 years of his life behind bars for a crime he hadn't committed. The man who had sacrificed everything for a friendship. The man who, without knowing it, had become an essential part of my personal tragedy. He looked at me confused. He was expecting Daniel, of course. No, me. I managed to speak even with my voice trembling. Daniel's not home right now. But come in. We need to talk. Because I know everything. I saw his face turn pale. I saw his eyes widen. And at that moment, when he stepped into my house and I closed the door behind him, I knew there was no turning back. The truth was going to come out, no matter the cost. The tension in that living room must have been unbearable. The killer, the victim's sister, and the proxy convict, Gael. The moment Daniel's mask finally shattered and the son heard everything. That's the true end of their family. Don't go anywhere. The final consequences are yet to be revealed. And I was going to have to face the consequences of everything that was about to happen. We sat in the living room, across from each other. He looked at the cookie tin on the table, with all the letters scattered around it. And he understood that I had read everything, that I knew everything. And that's when he asked, his voice hoarse, like someone who hadn't truly talked to anyone in years. "Who are you? How do you know?" I took a deep breath and said, "I'm Daniel's wife. And the girl you guys killed that night in August 1992 was my sister. My little sister, Jennifer." The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Gale went white, completely white. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. And then, suddenly, he broke down. He put his face in his hands and started to cry. A painful, deep cry, like someone releasing years and years of accumulated pain. And I stood there looking at that broken man and thought, my God, what did we do? What did all of us do? We stayed sitting there in my living room for I don't know how long. Me looking at that destroyed man crying in front of me. Him looking at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. The clock on the wall marked the passing time, but it felt like the world had stopped at that moment. When he finally managed to control himself a little, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked me in the eyes. And what I saw there broke my heart. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, it was just a deep, old sadness, the kind that lives inside you and never completely goes away. He started to talk. His voice came out low, hoarse, full of pauses. He told me that on that night in August 92, Daniel and he had gone out to celebrate. Daniel had gotten a full scholarship with a big engineering firm. It was his dream. The golden opportunity he had waited for all his life. They drank too much, celebrated too much, and when they decided to go home, they made the worst possible choice. Daniel insisted he was fine to drive. He said he had drunk less than Gael, and technically it was true, but he was still impaired. He still shouldn't have been behind that wheel. But Gael, who was also drunk, believed him, got in the car, and they left. Gael remembered every detail of that night. He said he would never forget, even if he lived to be 100. He remembered the song playing on the radio. He remembered the warm wind coming through the open window. He remembered laughing at some joke Daniel had told. And then, suddenly, the curve. Daniel losing control, the car going onto the sidewalk, the sound of the impact, a sound he said he still heard every day in his head. They stopped the car, got out running, and saw her, my little sister, lying there on the ground, her eyes still open, but lifeless, the blood forming a dark puddle around her head, and Daniel went into a total panic. He started screaming, crying, saying his life was over, that he would go to jail, that he would lose everything, the scholarship, the future, everything. Gael said that at that moment, seeing his desperate friend like that, he made the decision. He told Daniel to go home, to take a cab, that he would take the fall, that he would say he was driving alone, because Daniel had a family, had a future, had everything, and he, Gael, had nothing. He was the son of a poor family. He already had a few run-ins with the law for youthful foolishness. He didn't have great prospects in life. It seemed to make sense at that moment. It seemed like the right thing to do. So Daniel left, and Gail stayed there next to my sister's body, waiting a few minutes to give Daniel time to disappear. Then he got in the car and drove away. He left the car parked somewhere else and walked home. 3 days later, with a lawyer paid for by Daniel's family, he turned himself in, confessed everything, took the blame alone, and for the next 17 years, he paid. He paid with his freedom, he paid with his youth, he paid with his health, he paid with his dignity, because prison is no place for anyone, you know? He told me about the beatings he took, the times he went hungry because his food was stolen by the stronger inmates, the diseases he caught, the loneliness, the despair of being locked up in that place day after day, knowing that life was going on outside and he was losing everything. His mother died when he had served 8 years of his sentence, cancer. He couldn't go to the funeral. He didn't even get to say goodbye. He cried alone in his cell, hugging his pillow, while his mother's body was buried without him there. He said that was the day he almost gave up, almost killed himself. He seriously considered ending it all. Because why continue? Why endure all that if his mother wasn't even alive anymore to see him get out one day? But he didn't. He kept going because of the promise that Daniel's family had made, that when he got out, they would help him, give him a job, a chance to start over. That was what kept him alive. That was what made him wake up every day and not give up. The hope that one day he would get out of there and have a new life waiting. While he was talking, I remained silent, just listening, just absorbing every word. And as he told the story, one thing became clearer and clearer in my head. This man in front of me wasn't a villain. He was a victim, just as Jennifer was, just as I was. He had been used, manipulated, convinced to throw his life away for someone who didn't deserve that sacrifice. When he finished telling his story, he looked at me, waiting for some reaction, waiting for me to scream, to curse, to tell him to leave. But I didn't do any of that, because the anger I felt wasn't for him. It was for Daniel. It was for that man I called my husband, who slept next to me every day, who had built an entire life on the misfortune of 2 people. I looked at the clock. 4:30 inches the afternoon. Daniel would be home in about an hour and a half. I looked at Gail and said, "You're going to stay here. You're going to wait for him to get home, and we're going to settle this once and for all today." I saw fear cross his eyes. He asked what I was going to do, if I was going to call the police, if I was going to report Daniel. I said I didn't know yet, that I needed to hear his side too. I needed to look into my husband's eyes and see him confess, see him admit that he had killed my sister and let another man pay for it for 17 years. I offered Gail some water. He accepted. He drank it with hands trembling so much that he spilled half of it on the floor. I asked if he wanted something to eat. He said he couldn't, that his stomach was churning. I understood. Mine was too. We stayed there in that heavy silence, waiting. Every now and then I would look at him and think about how unfair life was, how one wrong decision, made in a moment of panic, could destroy so many lives. Jennifer had lost everything. Gail had lost 17 years. I had lost my sister and then, unknowingly, had married her killer. And even Daniel, in a way, had lost. He had lost the chance to be a real man, an honest man. He had spent all these years living with guilt, fear, and lies. 5:30, 6 o'clock. My children arrived home from school. When they saw Gael in the living room, they were puzzled. They asked who he was. I said he was an acquaintance of their father's who was waiting for him to arrive. I sent the boys to their rooms to do their homework. They obeyed, but I could tell by their looks that they knew something was wrong. Children sense these things. 6:15. My heart started beating faster. Daniel would be home any minute. That moment of waiting, it was more terrifying than the truth itself. I felt like a hunter, not a wife, preparing to spring a trap. The 3 of us, the one lost, the one deceived, and the one who paid the price, were all waiting for the one who caused it all. Have you ever felt the breath of fate closing in on you? Brace yourself. I stood up, sat down, went to the kitchen to get more water. I came back. Gael had his face in his hands, breathing deeply. He looked like he was going to have a panic attack at any moment. And then, at 6:23, I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, the engine turning off, the car door slamming, his footsteps coming toward the front door. I looked at Gael. He looked at me, and we stood there paralyzed, listening to the key turning in the lock. The door opened. Daniel walked in with his briefcase in his hand, his blazer slung over his shoulder. He was looking at his phone, distracted. He started talking without looking up. "Honey, sorry I'm late. There was a problem at the construction site and I had to." And then he looked up, saw Gail sitting on the sofa, and completely froze. His briefcase fell from his hand onto the floor, his phone too. His face went white, not that normal white of surprise. That white of someone who has seen a ghost, of someone who has seen the worst thing that could happen materialize in front of him. Gail stood up slowly. The two of them stood there looking at each other. 15 years. 15 years since they had last seen each other. The last time had been that day Gail turned himself in at the police station. Daniel had gone there secretly to thank him, to promise he would take care of everything when he got out. And now he was there, free, demanding the promise. Daniel tried to speak, opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, managed to stammer. "Gail, you got out? I didn't know that." That's when I stood up too. I picked up the cookie tin, dumped everything onto the coffee table. 32 letters scattered, all with the prison seal, all open, all red. And I spoke. My voice came out firm, cold, completely different from how I felt inside. "I know everything, Daniel. I know about the letters. I know what you did. I know you killed my sister and let this man here pay for it for 17 years. I saw the exact moment he understood, when he realized the charade was over, that there was nowhere left to run, no way left to lie. I knew everything, and I was standing right in front of him, along with the living proof of his mistake." He looked at me, then at Gael, then at the scattered letters, and he collapsed, literally collapsed. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees right there on the living room floor. He started to cry, a desperate cry, with loud sobs, his whole body shaking. He kept repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," like a lament, as if he could erase 17 years of lying with 2 words. But I didn't answer. I stood there, looking at that man on the floor, the man I had loved, the man I had built a family with, the man who had been my rock, my safe harbor, and now he was there, destroyed, showing who he really was beneath the mask. Gael also remained silent, just watching. I think even he didn't expect to see Daniel like that, so broken, so human, so pathetic. That's when Daniel started to talk. Between sobs, between tears, he started to confess. He said he hadn't gone a day, not a single day, without thinking about what he had done, that the guilt had been eating away at him inside all those years, that he saw Jennifer's face every night when he closed his eyes, that he woke up sweating, having nightmares about that night. And then came the part that utterly destroyed me. He said that when he met me at that literary event, he didn't know who I was. He had no idea. But when we started dating, when I told him about the sister I had lost in an accident, when I mentioned her name and the date, he was in shock. He realized I was the sister of the girl he had killed, and he thought about ending everything right then. He thought about leaving, about disappearing from my life, but he couldn't because he was already in love. He had already completely given himself over to that feeling, and he convinced himself, God knows how, that maybe this was fate, giving him a chance to redeem himself, to take care of the sister of the girl he had taken from the world, to make me happy as a way to compensate for what he had done. But he never had the courage to tell me, never, because he knew that when I found out, it would be over, that I would leave, that he would lose everything again. So he kept the secret. He kept it throughout our courtship. He kept it throughout our marriage. He kept it during the births of our children. He kept it during 12 years of lies, when in fact, he was just feeding his own guilt. When he finished speaking, the silence in the room was deafening. I could hear my own heart beating. I could hear Gail's breathing. I could hear Daniel's muffled sobs, still on his knees on the floor. And it was at that moment that I made my decision, the decision I already knew deep down I was going to make, but I needed to hear everything first. I needed to be absolutely certain. I looked at Daniel, that broken man on my living room floor, and said, "Get up." He got up slowly, his face red, his eyes swollen, his nose running. He looked like a child being reprimanded. But he wasn't a child. He was a man in his 40s, who had made conscious decisions, decisions that had destroyed lives. And then I said, "You destroyed everything. You took my sister from me. You let this man rot in jail for a crime he didn't commit, and you built our entire family on top of this lie. Do you think I'm going to forgive that? Do you think I'm just going to swallow all this and continue as if nothing happened?" He started talking again, begging, saying he loved me, that he had always loved me, that he would do anything to fix anything. But I cut him off. I said, "There is no fixing this. Some things once broken can never be fixed. And this here, this thing we had, you broke it in a way that there's no coming back from." That's when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around. My oldest son was standing right there in the living room doorway. He had heard everything. He was 17 years old, practically a man already, and by the look in his eyes, by the way he was looking at his father, I knew he had understood. He had understood everything. He looked at Daniel with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Then he looked at me and, without saying anything, went back to his room. He slammed the door, and I felt my heart break a little more, because my children were going to suffer from this too. They were going to carry the weight of knowing their father was a coward, a killer. Daniel saw it too. He saw the look in his son's eyes and collapsed again, because now it wasn't just me who knew. It was his son too. And soon it would be his other son. Soon it would be everyone. There was no going back. There was no hiding it anymore. And it was at that moment, with everything crumbling around us, that Gael finally spoke. He said he didn't want to destroy Daniel's family, that he had only come to demand the promise, that he just wanted a chance to start over, that he didn't want revenge, he didn't want to see anyone suffer more than he already had. But I looked at him and said, "Too late for that, Gael. The destruction already happened 17 years ago. We're just finally seeing the pieces now. But this time, Daniel, you don't get to manage the rubble. This time, I get to decide where the rebuild starts." And it was true. The bomb had exploded that night in August '92. We had just lived all these years on top of the rubble, pretending everything was fine. But now the rubble had come to light, and there was no pretending anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I lay on the bed in the guest room, because I wasn't going to share a bed with that man anymore, staring at the ceiling, reliving everything that had happened in those last few hours. Gael had left around 8 inches the evening. Before he left, I held his hand and promised I would help, that he wouldn't be left helpless, that somehow I would do what was right. He left my house with tears in his eyes, quietly thanking me. A man of almost 40 who looked like a lost boy. Daniel tried to come to me about 5 times during the night. He knocked on the guest room door, begged me to talk, said he needed to explain better, that there were things I didn't understand, but I didn't open that door. There was nothing more he could say that would change anything. His explanations wouldn't bring my sister back. They wouldn't give Gael 17 years back. They wouldn't erase the fact that everything we had built was a lie. The following days were a blur of pain. My oldest son wouldn't speak to his father, barely looked at him. My youngest still didn't know everything, but he realized something very serious had happened. The house that was once a home had turned into a silent battlefield, where everyone walked on eggshells, trying not to explode. A week after that cursed Friday, I sat down with both boys and told them everything. Everything, because they deserved to know. They deserved to understand why their family was falling apart. My oldest already knew, but hearing it from my mouth, with all the details, was different. My youngest, who was 13 years old, cried a lot. He cried for the aunt he never met. He cried for the father he had idolized all his life, and now saw with different eyes. He cried for the family that was breaking apart, and it was seeing my children suffer like that made me absolutely certain of my decision. I wasn't going to forgive. I wasn't going to pretend we could continue. Because if I stayed, if I swallowed all that and went on with the marriage, I would be teaching my children that it's okay to lie, that it's okay to be a coward, that it's okay to destroy lives, and then apologize as if that fixes anything. And I wasn't going to teach them that. No way. 2 weeks later, I contacted a lawyer, a good one, specialized in divorce. I told him the whole story. He was shocked. He asked if I wanted to prosecute Daniel criminally too, since technically his crime hadn't completely expired due to the circumstances. I thought about it a lot. Really a lot. But I decided not to. Not because he deserved to go unpunished, he didn't, but because my children didn't deserve to see their father arrested. They would already suffer enough from the divorce, the separation, and all the truth coming out. Putting their father in jail would be too much. It would destroy them completely. So, I focused on the divorce. I asked for the house. I asked for child support for the boys. I asked for half of everything we had built together over the years, and I made it very clear to the lawyer, ***, I don't want negotiation. I don't want an amicable settlement. I want everything I'm legally entitled to, because I spent 12 years of my life building a family with this man. 12 years, taking care of his house, his children, being a dedicated wife. And I discovered that everything was a lie, so he was going to pay. ***, in every way possible, Daniel didn't contest anything. He signed everything I asked for. I don't think he even had the strength to fight. He agreed to move out of the house, accepted the division of assets, accepted everything, and left. He went to live in a small apartment on the other side of town, away from me, away from the boys who barely wanted to see him. But before he completely left my life, we had one last conversation. A conversation I needed to have. I needed to ask one thing that had been eating away at me since that Friday. I called him into the living room. It was a Saturday morning. The boys had gone to spend the weekend at my mother's house. It was just the two of us in that house that was no longer ours. I sat down across from him and asked, "Did you ever really love me? Or was I just a way for you to try to forgive yourself for what you did?" I saw him swallow hard, saw the tears well up in his eyes again. And he answered in a broken voice, ***, I loved you. God is my witness that I truly loved you, but I can't say where the love ended and the guilt began. I don't know if I managed to separate the two. That is the tragic, heartbreaking, final truth. Daniel himself couldn't separate his love from his guilt, and that is why Sophia had to walk away. She chose peace over a contaminated love. Stick around for the very end of the story to see how she finally finds healing and justice for Gail. And here was the answer. The final truth. He didn't know if he loved me or was just trying to atone. That kind of love, it's better to have none at all. It's like a glass of poisoned water. You can't drink it and expect to be okay. Maybe I loved you precisely because you were her sister, as if by taking care of you, I could somehow compensate for what I did. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. ***. And that answer, that brutal honesty, was what I needed to hear, because it confirmed what I already suspected. His love was contaminated. It was sick. It was built on guilt and lies. It had never been pure. It had never been true in the real sense of the word. Then I said, go away, and don't come back. You can see the boys when they want to see you. You can continue to be their father if they allow it. But with me, it's over. It's over forever. And don't come looking for me in a few years, thinking time heals everything, because it doesn't. Some wounds stay open forever. He left that same day, took the suitcases that had already been packed for a week, got in the car, and drove away. I watched through the window, seeing him go, and, for the first time in months, I felt a little relief, because that burden of pretending was over. That scene, it didn't bring joy, just a cold relief. I chose solitude in the truth, rather than continuing to pretend happiness in the lie. Friends, sometimes, peace only comes when we bravely close the door on what has hurt us. Be brave. That torture of looking at his face every day and knowing what he had done was finished. I was alone now. But it was a clean, honest solitude. The following months were the hardest of my life. I had to start over from scratch at 44 years old. I had to find a job because the alimony he paid only covered the boys. It didn't cover my expenses. I got a job at a clothing store downtown. It wasn't much. I earned little, but it was honest. It was mine. There were days when I woke up and didn't want to get out of bed. Days when the sadness was so great that it felt like it would swallow me whole, because it wasn't just the separation. It was everything. It was having lost my sister again, in a different way. It was having discovered that the 12 most important years of my adult life had been a lie. It was seeing my children suffer and not being able to do anything to ease their pain. The youngest dealt with it better in a way. Younger, more flexible, he continued seeing his father on weekends, but the relationship changed. It was never the same again, because how do you look at your father the same way after knowing he destroyed so many lives? Meanwhile, I kept my promise to Gail. I used part of the money I got in the asset division to help him. I rented a simple room for him to live in. I bought him clothes, basic furniture, the things he needed to start over. I helped him get a job at an auto repair shop. The owner was an acquaintance of a cousin of mine. He agreed to give Gail a chance, even knowing he had spent years in prison. Gail was so grateful that he cried when I handed him the keys to the room. He said he didn't know how he would thank me. I replied that he didn't need to thank me for anything, that it was the least he deserved after everything he had been through. And more than that, it was the right thing to do, because he was a victim too. He had been manipulated, used, thrown away as if he were nothing. We saw each other from time to time. He would come to my house for a coffee. He would tell me how the adjustment to life outside was going after so long. It was difficult, he said, very difficult. The world had changed so much. People walked around with those modern cell phones. Everything was the internet. Everything was fast. He felt lost, as if he had parachuted onto a different planet. But he was trying. He worked hard at the auto repair shop. He saved every penny. He had plans to eventually take a course, learn a better trade, and I admired that in him. I admired the strength he had to keep going, not to give up, even after everything. One day he asked me if I had forgiven Daniel. If one day I would forgive him. I looked at him and answered truthfully, no, I haven't forgiven him, and I won't. Some things in this life are unforgivable, and what he did is one of them. Gail was silent for a while, then said, I haven't forgiven him either. I thought I would forgive him when I got out, you know? I thought after so long the anger would have passed, but it hasn't. It's still here, trapped in my chest, and I think it will stay forever. And we understood each other at that moment. Two survivors of the same disaster, united by the pain the same man had caused in our lives. The years passed slowly, but they did. My children grew up. My oldest went to college, decided to study law. He said he wanted to help people who suffered injustices. I think everything he went through molded him that way, made him want to fight for what is right. The youngest graduated from high school, got a job, started dating a beautiful girl, built his life. He continued seeing his father from time to time, but the relationship was distant, formal, as if they were acquaintances, not father and son. I kept working. I left the clothing store and got a better job at a school, helping in the secretary's office. I liked being around the children, seeing all that energy. It reminded me that life goes on, despite everything. And slowly, very slowly, I rebuilt myself. I pieced together the fragments of the person I was before everything fell apart. I didn't go back to being the same person. That's impossible. But I became someone new, someone stronger, more aware, firmer in my convictions. I learned that forgiveness is not mandatory, that we can choose not to forgive and still move forward. We can choose not to carry anger every day, but also not to erase what happened as if it didn't matter, because it did. It mattered a lot. Daniel tried to reach out to me a few times over the years. He sent messages on birthdays, on Christmas, tried to start a conversation about the boys, but I only replied what was necessary, polite, but distant, because I had drawn that line, and I wasn't going to cross it. He was no longer part of my life, and he never would be again. Looking back now, that time spent in darkness feels like a distant nightmare. There was a point when my life was just a cookie tin, filled with toxic letters, a suffocating dead end. But today, I sit here in a home filled with my children's laughter, feeling the peace I thought I'd lost forever. I lost a sister and a marriage, yet I found myself, a woman strong enough to rebuild her life from the ashes of deceit. My journey of overcoming this pain is a true story about the resilience of the human spirit. If I can find my way out of my own personal hell, you can overcome any hardship in your life too. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so we can spread these positive messages together.